Okay, we are going to roll. So thank you everybody for coming on to this podcast um, or this webinar. Sorry, used to doing podcasts. So I think what the goal of move on here. So what this presentation is and is not. So what this presentation is that the point of it is going to be educational. It's going to be informative, and the goal of it, truthfully, I want it to be usable. What I don't want it to be is I don't want it to turn into a discussion on the correct training methods. I think that's, I think as if anybody here is a coach, um, you hear a lot about different kind of training methods, different kind of periodizations, different kind of ways to do training. And I think if you've been coaching long enough, I think you realize that it doesn't really matter. If you use polarized training or threshold training, it's all just kind of, it's just a headache discussing all of that. It's not meant to change your mind on anything. Again, what I want this to be is informative, something you can use. So I'm not here trying to steer you a different way on any kind of training or something you may be doing. So if you're working with a coach, I'm not here trying to say this is the only way to do it. I'm just here discussing a lot of things about heart rate training and power training, and you'll see this is certainly not going to be some in-depth peer review discussion about TSS and blah de blah. We are going to dive into a lot of the terminology, but by no means are we going to sit here and bore you with all of the science behind a lot of this, because again, I think that's half the issue, and probably why many of you are listening to this is that you can read it all on all the articles, but I think the most difficult thing is the application of all this data. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about the application behind the science behind all of it. And again, I think the fifth one is my goal is to not turn you into RoboCop. So I think when you think of RoboCop, when I think of RoboCop, it's like a one way only, like I'm sure you get it when you hear it. So, and I think when I'm thinking of this, I want it to be very flexible, right? Not one way is the highway type of thinking. So what you can do on this webinar is ask questions. I have the chat box next to me open at all times, so I can see if you're asking questions. It's best to just to send a message to the chat box, or if you really want to ask the questions, or if I pause, ask a question, please. I mean, I think as always, if you have questions, the last thing you want to do is leave this. And I think last weekend on Sunday, we did a team webinar with my athletes, and the more people who ask questions, it benefits everybody. So don't be afraid to be that person asking questions in the chat box. So we're going to start with the terminology, and if I go over, if I don't hit some terms that you want me to talk about or discuss, again, please put them in the chat box. But I'm going to go through a wide variety of the terminology and the terms that you see used on Training Peaks and everything else. So here is the list that we are going to go through. Kilojoules, normalized power, TSS, all this stuff. So I'll go through it. The first thing that we are going to talk about is kilojoules. If you look in the chat, in the box at the very bottom, you will. This is a very common Training Peaks summary box, and so in there you will see work. You'll see kilojoules. This is the first one, and so kilojoules, and we're going to get into this one because it's an important one. Kilojoules is basically the total energy of the workout. Okay, it's not TSS. Kilojoules is the total energy of a workout. Normalized power, your NP. Now, there's a difference between normalized power and average power. Normalized power, most of the time, is going to be the power number that you want to look at. That is the actual metabolic cost, the physiological cost of the workout. So when you're looking at, ooh, I have some participants that look like they want to get in. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I can add it. So sorry to them who is waiting. Oops. Give me one moment here. Oh, shoot. Okay. Okay. So the metabolic cost. So a lot of times when you see average power, so average power again is different than normalized power. And when you're looking at average power, typically your average power is going to be lower than your normalized power. And when you're looking at average power has all of your free pedaling, your soft pedaling happening. So if you live in Wisconsin, or if you're just riding in general, and you typically soft pedal, which means your power goes to zero, that's going to affect your average power, which is just going to affect your variable index, which we'll get to. Your TSS, your training stress score, which is labeled as TSS. So your TSS, I like to just basically say, this is how hard the ride felt. It's like a measurement tool, and you can, so TSS is looked at, the base number you can look at is if you're going to ride 1 hour at your threshold, 100% of your threshold, that is 100 points. If you ride 50% of your FTP for 1 hour, that's 50 TSS points. So I think good data points to look at is for an Ironman, and we'll get into this, your TSS score is going to be around 250 to 260 to 280. If you're above 300 TSS for an Ironman, chances are you're going to be walking quite a bit of the ride, as long as your numbers are correct in here. And so TSS, I like to think, is that how hard was this ride? How hard did it feel? It's a feeling. One thing too to look at is your variable index, and that is looking at how smooth and how smart you pedal. And a lot of times you see people look at, well, if I live in Illinois, it's very easy to hold. Well, so variable index is normalized power into average power, because those are different. And so if there's a lot of soft pedaling, you're going to have a bigger VI, variable index. So if you look at the bottom, the example that I have is 1.20, which is not very good. 1.00 is perfect. So typically if you're riding inside, if you're riding on the trainer, your VI is very, very good. Typically when you get outside and you're going to stop signs, you're going down hills and you're soft pedaling, you're going to start to see that VI very, very high. And 1.2 is very high. It's not very good. But typically VIs is how smart and how smooth you pedal. And that certainly has a large effect about how you race. Commonly too, when I'm looking at files for athletes, is when somebody gets tired, I start to see the VI change. And you can see it, right? When you look at your Training Peaks account and you look at your power file, you see all those dropouts. And it's, as a coach, it's super visible to see when somebody's fatiguing, because they basically, every chance they get, they're soft pedaling. So if your VI is, typically if I see somebody's VI that's above 1.1, I start to ask questions about what's going on. Watts per kilo, basically how strong you really are. And you need to, so watts per kilo, if you're looking at it, it's basically the differentiate between somebody who weighs 200 pounds versus somebody who weighs 100 pounds, or somebody who weighs 200 and 150. So if I'm looking at a person, if I'm right next to somebody and I'm looking at their power, I'm like, wow, that person's pushing 250 watts and I'm pushing 200 watts. It's like you're looking at it in regards to, well, that person's pushing more. But if he weighs 200 pounds and I weigh 150 pounds, and if you put that into your watts per kilo, so if I'm riding at 3.5 and he's riding at 3.0, well, I'm actually stronger, even though I'm smaller. So don't look at the actual FTP number or the actual wattage as the most important number. How you look at it in regards to watts per kilo is important. And so what I'm looking at, so this is where people get confused is when they're asking, well, am I getting better? Am I getting better? So if you're doing testing regularly, I always look at this in regards to what is their FTP, their threshold power, and how much do they weigh? Because how much you weigh plays a huge part into how strong you are. Because again, if your threshold number is getting bigger, but you're putting on more weight, then you're actually not really getting better, even though your absolute number is getting better. So you have to look at this in terms of what is your weight into your threshold. And you can think, well, I'm just going to lose a bunch of weight. Not always the best idea, because if you're so focused on one number, which is the weight, then you can get yourself really weak. You can get yourself really injured and malnourished. So it's a difficult topic to bring up, because a lot of times people think, well, I'm just going to lose a bunch of weight. I'm like, well, it's not always the best way to look at it. You have to kind of balance that really well. Intensity factor, your IF, that's basically the percentage of your FTP that you trained at. And then your functional threshold power, your FTP. It's basically how big your engine is, how big your heart is. So pretty commonly, people who have a higher FTP, commonly they just have better endurance. That basically means their heart is way stronger, is pumping way more blood to the muscles. It's just stronger. And so when you're looking at functional threshold power, I enlarged the functional. Functional means moving. And a lot of athletes have a really difficult time with this, because it's like they test, and let's just say their FTP is 200 watts. And let's say the next day, your kid's not sleeping, you're tired, and you do an FTP workout, say 3 by 10 minutes, and you just can't push your FTP. You're thinking, well, my FTP is wrong. No, your FTP changes. And a lot of times people think, well, it's the power you can hold for 1 hour. That's not always the case. So commonly, it's the power you can hold between 40 minutes to an hour. So it's not always 1 hour. It's not always 40 minutes. Sometimes you feel good. Sometimes you feel bad. Commonly your FTP outside is higher than what your FTP inside is. And so a lot of it is, it's moving. It's not always the same number. And so understand that your FTP can drop 10 watts in a day off of how much stress you have going on in your life. So don't get too caught up on the one number. It flexes, it moves, okay? Your power to heart rate. It's basically like your aerobic decoupling. And we'll get into this because this is super important. It is basically the symbol of the pacing and the depth of your engine. And we'll get into this more. Your EF, your efficiency factor, that's normalized power into your heart rate. And this isn't in Training Peaks, but I added it. Basically your bike fit and your CDA. Basically, how aero are you? Like, what is your aerodynamic position? Because it is, I think, incredibly important. And you should have an idea of what this is. And it's super tough to know, but we'll get into that. And so I wanted to go back to your TSS, and I put those markers there for a reason, is because a lot of people get caught up on TSS, and people like to train by TSS. And just understand that all of these things are tools. They're all tools. They're not all absolute. So if you're somebody who grabs to one thing, like your watts per kilo or your FTP or your CDA, you never want to grab to one thing. You always want to have everything and look at it like a tool. But if you just get hung up on one too many things, then you're going to fail at some point. And so when I look at TSS, this is a true story. So an athlete of mine, a newer athlete, we were working together, and we were like doing like some VO2 max. Like we were in a VO2 max phase. We were doing a lot of zone 5 and zone 6 work. and he's working really hard, doing a lot of good sessions, and he says to me, I'm just having a really hard time with these workouts because I'm working really hard, but the TSS of my workout, my overall workout, is so low. And TSS, he was looking at in regards to a generalization of how hard the session was. So even though, say, he was doing 5 by 3 minutes at zone 5, it's only 15 minutes of work. Like, your TSS for that session is not going to be very big. But what we're looking at is like, what is the goal of the session? It's a VO2 max session. But if I gave you 3 by 20 minutes at 90%, like, your TSS of that workout will be massive. And so not all TSS scores are created the same. So I could give somebody an hour and a half ride versus an hour ride, but that hour ride may have a lower TSS number, but it might be way more effective. So if you're just looking at training as a generalization of, I'm just going to accumulate 600 TSS points this week, it could mean nothing. You could just go out there and hammer and get no benefit from the training. So not all TSS is created equal. Have a goal to your session, have a goal to your week, have a goal to your month. Is your goal improving FTP? Is your goal VO2 max? Is your goal recovery? So don't look at TSS too much. I like to look at it, but I don't like to live by it. And the one at the bottom, I went through FTP functional. I want to talk about bike fitting a little bit, where bike fitting is critical to your success. And a lot of it is, there's 2 or 3 variables that you look at in regards to bike fitting. And you're looking at, number one, can you produce power? Okay. So if you're training and you get into your aero position, and if you cannot produce your power in your bike fit, you need to have a look at your bike fit. It's not about getting like as low as you possibly can, because you see pictures of athletes, and they're of really good athletes, and they're in really low positions. One, you need to understand these people have been riding these positions for a long time. 2, you need to look at it in regards to, what is the distance of their event? So these people, like, let's just say pros, they're doing their ride in 4 hours and 30 minutes for an Ironman ride. They're doing half Ironmans in 2 hours to 2:10. The average mortal is on the bike for 6 hours. They're on the bike for 5 hours. For a half Ironman, they're on the bike for 2.5 to 3.5 hours. So your bike fit does not need to model somebody else's. It needs to model the idea of, are you comfortable and can you produce power? Because the other part of it is, if you just put your bike super low, but you can't sit in your position for the whole entire bike ride, then the bike fit's bad. Okay, like, can you produce power? Can you hold a position? When I was living in Asheville, I spent a lot of time in the wind tunnel. Not personally, but we would get hired and we would go to the wind tunnel, the A2 wind tunnel. It's not really in Asheville, but they call it that. And so when you're looking at it, is when somebody goes from any aero position in your bars to popping up and getting onto their basic brake hoods, and they're sitting up, the drag numbers went up massively. And so if you always have to pop up and stretch your back and you can't hold your aero position, then the position's no good. Most people, it's amazing is that when I talk to athletes, how many people are not actually getting bike fits by reputable bike fitters. They just kind of wing it. And it's funny is, when I'm doing Ironman loops on the course, and I'm passing people, it's like, it's funny how my eye always goes to, what do they look like on a bike? Like, what is their bike fit? Like, are they riding and are they like their knees bowing outwards? Are they sitting up based on a road bike, like a road bike position? Like, they're so high in the front. If you can do yourself one favor, is get yourself a bike fit by a reputable fitter that's comfortable and powerful, not just super low that you think is going to be quicker. So I'm going to go and rate these. So kilojoules on basically an ABCDEF scale. A plus for kilojoules. Kilojoules, if you can learn one thing on this, it's going to be kilojoules. Kilojoules is super, super important. I'm going to let some more people in here. There we go. So kilojoules, A plus, total A plus. Normalized power, an A. TSS, B minus. I don't put it personally that high into my book. Your variable index, I gave it a B. I gave it a B. If you just came in, if you could mute your mic, that'd be great. Your watts per kilo, A. Intensity factor, A. Functional threshold power, an A. Your aerobic decoupling, B. Efficiency factor, C. Your bike fit, CDA, A. I'm gonna go through, I'm gonna pick the top 3 things on my list. The top 3 things that I think that you should be paying attention to is kilojoules, watts per kilo, bike fit. So these 3 things, I think, are the 3 most important areas that you need to be spending time working on for your training. Kilojoules, watts per kilo, in your bike fit. Okay. Somebody asked, can you explain soft pedaling? Soft pedaling is basically the second, so if you're riding at 100 watts, 200 watts, 300 watts, and you're going from some level of pressure on the pedals to stop to no pedaling whatsoever, no pedaling, to where there's no tension, nothing, your legs are not moving. That is soft pedaling. That is soft pedaling. So I'm going to get a little bit into kilojoules. And so kilojoules, it's a big word. I'm sure a lot of people have never even heard of the term kilojoules before this meeting. So I want you to understand that your kilojoules is the energy that whatever ride you're doing is. So if you're doing an Ironman bike ride, okay, that bike ride has an energy attachment to it, okay? It is like the most specific thing that dictates the specificity of your ride. It's not the power, it's not the hills, it's how much energy is this ride gonna take me. So I gave you the equation, you can Google this, but this is basically how you find it. And it's really, really easy, okay? So let's say you're doing an Ironman and you're gonna ride 200 watts. And let's just say it's gonna take you 5.5 hours. The kilojoule expenditure of that ride is basically 4,000 kilojoules. The same thing for the half Ironman, the same thing for the 40K. And so mistakes. These are the biggest mistakes I see people making, is they're not meeting the demands of competition and training. And a lot of times this is because they aren't aware of it. So this is one example. People go out, they're training for an Ironman, a half Ironman, and they just ride 56 miles. They just ride 56, they do it again, they're riding 56 miles or 112. Well, a lot of people, believe it or not, are not riding 112 miles before their ride. But on race day, they go harder. So what they think is, well, I've covered the distance. I've covered it. I'm used to riding the distance. But they actually haven't ridden it at the intensity level or the energy that they're going to on race day. And so you can either go, 56 miles at race pace. You can do 56 miles with intervals in there. You can go 60 miles. You can go 65 miles. You can go 70 miles. So I think that's one way to look at is finish a long ride and look at what is my kilojoules for this, okay? And then you should figure out, well, I'm going to do a half Ironman. It's going to take me 3 hours. I'm going to average this power. Boom, my kilojoules is this. Thinking, well, shoot, I rode 60 miles and it was 1,500 kilojoules, but my race is going to be 17. So you didn't even meet the demands of what you're going to race. And so what happens when you don't exceed the demands of competition in training? You fade. The second half of the bike ride, you fade. This is a big one. You start to overheat. Your core temperature goes way up. So when you get to the run, or you get to somewhere in the second half of the run, you start to feel really warm. Or somewhere on the bike, you start to feel really warm. It's because you're overexerting. It's because you're going to a place you've never gone to before. And when you start to overheat, you're done. You can't really recover from overheating. You can put all the water on your head, all of what you can. But if you are not conditioned, which goes back to meeting the demands of competition and training. So if you have a 3-hour ride and you're just futzing around on the 3-hour ride, you're not really doing much good. It may make you think that, oh yeah, this is 3 hours on a bike, 3 hours in a race. It's not the same. Like, your long ride is the most important ride of the week, and it needs to be hard. Okay, it needs to be hard. Cramping, right? You get to the end, like, on, like, say you're doing Ironman Wisconsin and you finish the loop, both loops, 80 miles in, whatever. And you have, well, it's more than that, but either way, you have the stick to go back. And all of a sudden, like, oh, my hamstring feels a little tweaky. My calves feel a little tweaky. It's because you probably haven't ridden the duration or the kilojoules or the energy. You haven't even exceeded that part. So when I see people come up to Madison and they do 2 loops, and I think that's enough. They do 2 loops, I think it's enough. Well, it's not, right? I mean, you should be doing a lot of 112s. You should be doing rides that exceed it. But you can do, let's say, a 100-mile ride and add in 4 by 30 minutes of power that's above race power. That's all helping you get to a higher kilojoule expenditure. So you can do shorter duration rides, but with more intensity to get to that point. You can create GI stress. So, your stomach gets tight, you feel bloated, you start to fart a lot, you start to feel like you're going to throw up. A lot of times people are like, well, I haven't practiced my nutrition. No, it's because, again, your body's going through something that it never has. And so what happens is you cramp, you get GI stress. Typically, people who have not met the demands on the bike, they're in such a calorie deficit. By the run, they're just walking. So commonly, if you are walking a lot on the run, if you get to the run and you're cramping and you're walking, don't think, oh, I need to do more run training. It's probably you need to get fitter on the bike. You need to get fitter on the swim. So don't think like if you're walking a lot in triathlon runs, chances are it has little to do with the run. The run is so slow to begin with. But a lot of the times it has to do with you just have not trained the bike long enough and you haven't trained it hard enough. Mentally, you're defeated. When you're exhausted, right? When you are exhausted. It doesn't feel good. When you have pushed your body past its limit. And you do not want race day to be the hardest ride of the year. You just don't. Like, that doesn't even feel good. Any of us wasted a year of training, or however long that you've been training for, that you haven't put in the time and you haven't put in the work required to be successful on race day. And some of it's just not even knowing. This is why you're here, to learn, and just make sure that those long rides count. Do the math, figure it out. This is the beauty of having a power meter. Kilojoules are greater than TSS, always. TSS, it's what it feels like, versus kilojoules, what it actually is. Okay? Any questions here? Any questions at all? Give it a moment. Okay. Racing with your power meter. Pros. Racing with your power meter. Racing made easy. Super easy. Racing to potential. Racing smoother, faster, and more even. Riding hillier terrain smarter and smoother. Running off the bike faster. Race day confidence and glycogen sparing. So if you have a power meter and you're using it correctly, it makes racing so easy. So when anybody asks me, should I get a power meter? It's always yes. Like, if you can fit it within the financial budget, always get a power meter. Always. I mean, one reason is people act like, it's like the one reason people do sport is, are you getting better? Are you racing faster? And the power meter tells you, right? You do all this testing, if it's 20-minute tests, if it's 30-minute tests, if it's 1 year after the next, oh, my power over a half Ironman is getting better. Well, chances are you're getting better, but you would never really know that if you didn't have a power meter. Sure, your times are quicker, but like all the training up to that point, right? You have the data to see it. Or it's like, okay, I was riding 200 watts and my heart rate was 150, and now I'm riding 200 watts and my heart rate's 140. You're getting better, right? You're getting stronger. You need those data points to know that. Racing to potential. And a lot of it is, until you have a power meter, you're really not quite sure if you're pushing yourself to that point. Unless you're very experienced, then you can kind of get away with that. But if you're new, a lot of people, it's like, you need that point where thinking, okay, do an FTP test, kind of figure out what your build level is, what your time is for the race, and thinking, just ride these watts. That's all I need to do. Yeah, just ride these watts. Okay, it's as easy as that. Smoother and faster and more even. So let's just assume that many of these people are living in Wisconsin or are going to ride somewhere where it's hilly. So the Powermeter it's amazing for, I'm sure many people have experienced this, and I hope somebody listening to this is not that person, but like, let's say that you're riding Wisconsin or Madison Half Ironman or any hilly race, and you have your target wattage. Let's say it's 200 watts, and you're approaching Old Sauk. Okay, you're approaching Old Sauk, and you're thinking, okay, don't go up this hill. Don't go up this hill any harder than that. And all of a sudden, you see somebody just like rip past you, like they're sprinting. And you're thinking, oh, should I be going harder? No. And like, I'm sure many of these people, you've experienced this in races where you're going up a hill and you're doing your thing, and it's like somebody come past you, like you're standing still. And you're thinking, just keep my power, keep my power. And then what happens? You pass that person because they're basically hyperventilating on top of the hill. It's like the worst thing to do if you ride in a race is to just get to a hill and smash it, right? Just, that's the beauty of the Powermeter, thinking, don't go above this number. Don't go above this number. Ride it smarter, because you may think that little acceleration, is going to help you keep your speed up, but all it's going to do is fatigue your legs. You're going to rip through more glycogen. You're going to burn a lot of matches, and it's just not smart riding. So having the Powermeter and having ranges where you're thinking, okay, on the flats, I'm going to average this. On the hills, I'm going to average this. This is how you're going to do that. Faster running off the bike kind of comes to better pacing. Race day confidence. I think that's a huge thing we're looking at in regards to on race day, the day before that, the day before this. What's giving you confidence? Your race plan. So if you don't have a race plan, you're kind of winging it. You think, oh, I'm going to kind of just do this. I'm like, well, that's just not going to cut it. But if you can say to yourself or your coach or whoever, and you can write it down and say, I'm going to average this. I'm going to do this on this hill. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do this on that. Then you can visualize it. But if you can't visualize your race, then you're just going to at some point it's going to catch up to you, and you're going to be like, oh, yeah, I'm pretty nervous because I have no idea what I'm going to do. Glycogen, carbohydrates. So let's just say that you are riding and you're racing, and the goal is to ride 70% of your FTP, 75% of your FTP, whatever it might be. And you're like, I feel good today. I'm going to ride at 80. Just forget what my coach said. I'm going to ride at 80%. That's what feels good today. I'm going to ride at 85%. You understand that the harder you go, the more glycogen you burn. Okay. You have maybe an hour and a half of glycogen in the muscles and in the liver. And if you go too hard and you're just because you feel good and this just feels good to me today, but then you run like crap on the bike or run like crap, it's because you went too hard. Having a Powermeter gives you confidence. Say, if I ride these watts, if I stay at this % of my FTP, I'm going to conserve that glycogen. That's going to make me run better. Cons. I was talking to someone about this too. People who have way too much dependency on their power meters. Right now, I'm like talking power meters are the best things in the world, and I'm saying people have too much dependency on them. Like, I would not lie if I had athletes of my own that if their power meter didn't work, they wouldn't ride. One, they think that their bike wouldn't work without the power meter. But it's like on race day, let's say that it's cold or you forget to calibrate your power meter and it's off. Like, oh, it just doesn't feel like my watts seem so much higher than what my effort is. But my watts say this, I need to ride these watts. Like if you don't have that level of ability to adjust off of effort, it's not going to end well for you. And I think a lot of people, they're like, I need to stick exactly to this no matter how I feel. You need to be way more adjustable. You need to learn to adapt. And typically you see people who are very numbers driven. And when I say to them, we need to be more flexible, it's like they don't get what that means. And I get that. I understand that. That's how you're wired. But unfortunately, you have to work off of effort. You have to know what effort feels like. So how to set up percentages of FTP for race day. This is super key, super helpful. I stole this graph. It's a super well-known graph if you didn't know. You can basically Google it if you want to keep it. It's Joe Friel, and basically you can just Google FTP race day, Joe Friel. You can find this chart. And this chart, if there's one chart in triathlon that has stuck around for probably the most accurate chart for setting up percentages of FTP for time, it's this chart. So, and I like how it says in there, right? So it's like dark orange, it says that if you're in this number, you're likely blown, try again next year. Super common. The one above that says, yeah, you'll run a few miles, then you're basically going to walk. This one is for proven strong Ironman runners. And when they mean for strong, proven runners, they mean it. That's not the default. So a lot of times you want to be in the dark gray. The dark gray for most people is good. But if you're a new athlete, if you're a new Ironman athlete, a new half Ironman athlete, that middle gray is perfect for you. But the problem is that I find is when I tell people who are going to ride 6+ hours that they need to be below 60%. They're like, huh? Well, I'm below 70%. Like what? Below 70? Like that's so easy. Like that's so easy. I need to ride harder than that. I'm like, no. Like I get that it's easy. If you're gonna ride 112 miles, the power better feel easy. If you're out there at 40 miles into the bike ride and you're like, wow, this is hard, you better slow down. But it's like it holds true. If anybody that rides above typically 300 TSS, if I look at their Ironman bike file, and if it says 301, their run probably did not go very well. If it showed 280, they probably ran awesome. But this chart, if you want to follow a chart, this is the chart. I have not seen one for half Ironman racing. I have not. But we'll get a little bit into TSS for half Ironman racing. Can you explain how important calibrating your power is for racing and training? It's very important, super, super important. So commonly, if you want to, you should be calibrating your bike, your power meter every ride. It literally takes 5 seconds. And on every Garmin that I've seen, the first thing that pops up once your power meter connects, it says, do you want to calibrate? Just hit yes. It takes 2 seconds and it helps the accuracy of that. So get that done. Okay, look at this chart. Like it, super, super good, super great. Data screens. I wanted to talk about this just because I think that I've seen, like, I kid you not, I've seen people use power meters and not have the power data screen showing. Or they have a heart rate monitor, but they have a different setting. And you can change the settings on your Garmin or your Wahoo. Okay, you can. So, and there should be a difference between your data screens. So this data screen is the data screen I use for interval training. Okay. So this is the typical screen that I have. I'm looking at inside, outside training, normalized lap power, because if I'm doing intervals, I want to know the lap power of that workout, the average 3 seconds for the power, the percentage of FTP, the current lap. So if I'm doing a 10-minute interval, I can see the lap that I'm doing and my cadence. So big thing, if you're never have just power, that's a mistake that people make. Never have power, let alone power, be your data screen. It's basically every little micro change in power, it happens. And people go nuts. Get the 3-second or get the 10-second average. It'll be a lifesaver for you. It smooths everything out. It helps out tremendously. So the rest of it's pretty self-explanatory. I also have this one. Let's go data crazy here. So this is the second screen. I never look at this. I'd go nuts. I would just go blurry-eyed if I had this as the main screen. People have it though. I don't get why they do. But this is like my second screen. How far am I going? Which is funny because if I'm riding outside, I never really know how far I am into a ride, nor do I want to know because it kind of psychs me out. If I'm having a good day or a bad day, I don't want to know. Kilojoules for the obvious reason, average heart rate, normalized power, you can see it. So this is like my, the first screen is the screen that I'm looking at in regards to what is my process? Like what is the process that I'm trying to achieve right now? And then the second screen is more the end result. Okay, how much closer am I to my 350 TSS day? How much closer am I to my 4,000 kilojoule day? Because I know if I'm going to race an Ironman, and if I'm going to go 520, whatever, I know that my kilojoule requirement is anywhere from 36 to 3,800 kilojoules. And I know that my best rides where I've not faded off the back have come when I've put in 3 to 4 to 5 rides that have exceeded 3,800 kilojoules. They're not easy rides, but when I get to race day, you're conditioned. And this is what my race screen looks like. Boom. When I'm racing, this is the screen that I'm looking at. Super simple. I don't ever have TSS. I don't really have ever like, what's my normalized power for the whole entire ride? I never have that. I look at my 10-second, my percentage of FTP, my overall time for the obvious reason I want to continue to know that I'm drinking and I'm eating on time. I also have like a watch on my wrist that just beeps every 15 minutes. Every 15 minutes, 20 to 25 grams of carbohydrate goes in. Every 15 minutes. That just beeps. And my heart rate. We'll get into heart rate more. I'm going to talk about heart rate and power. I promise you I will. Examples of race files. Okay, here's the first one. Obviously an Ironman. Look at the data points. So this person, the TSS of the ride, first thing you should look at, 285. Perfect. 285. A perfect ride. The kilojoules for this, 3,600. Normalized power, 216. The aerobic decoupling, 1.76. Pretty darn good. You want to be anywhere from 0 to 5%. Intensity factor, 76% of FTP. His variance is 1.07. You can tell that that's pretty common for a race that has 4,400 feet of gain. The watts per kilo is not accurate. Do not look at that. It's probably more like 3.3 he rode, 3.4, maybe 3.5. Now look at the graph, right? Heart rate on the top, red, power, everything else. So let's break it down a little bit. So the first hour, 77% of FTP, aerobic decoupling, 1.1%. Friggin' sweet. Hour 2, 75%, 0.5. Hour 3, 77, a little bit hillier at that point, 0.5. Hour 4, 5%. Hour 5, 1%. On race day, his CTL, we'll get into this, was 145. On race day, his TSB, we'll get into this, was 15. That's basically the freshness factor of what he was doing. 4 months leading into this race, the average TSS weeks was 880. Pretty legitimate. We'll get into this. This is super important stuff. If you don't If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's fine. But we're going to get into it a little bit more. But overall, this is a phenomenal file for a ride. You can look at the heart rate, like the heart rate on the top, the red. It's like it doesn't move. Like it's perfect. It's a sign of great fitness. It's a sign of great pacing. Really, really good job with this ride. Now, obviously, I'm going to show you a bad ride. Let's just look at this. No heart rate, unfortunately. This person did an Ironman and rode 5 hours and 48 minutes. And kilojoules was 3,500. Normalized watts, 185. Obviously, you can tell this is Ironman Wisconsin. I don't think the watts per kilo is correct in this. Intensity factor, 77%. Variable index, 1.09. It's pretty high. It's pretty high for an Ironman. But look at the TSS, 343. That's huge. I mean, that's really hard riding. Now look at the power on the file. It's the pinkish red. You can see that it starts strong and it fades and it fades and it fades. Mistake number one, the first 42 minutes of the ride were done at 82%. Do you know what that says? That says that the person was like, I felt good. I'm going to kill it. This is my day. 82%. I just can't hold back. I'm invincible today. Next 42 minutes, 78%. The final 42 minutes or 43 minutes of the ride, 72%. That's a 10% difference in power. What was the run like? A lot of walking, a ton of walking. I mean, the TSS was 343. I mean, you're not going to run off of 343 TSS points. You're not. So what is this called? Classic overbiking. Classic overbiking. The overbiking syndrome. It's all about that bike split. All about that bike split. But let's hope you get in by before midnight. Ride 548. You going to run 548 or walk 548? You got to ride smarter. You got to pace it better. The fact that the first 45 minutes basically was at 85%, 82%, which is basically half Ironman power. In 82% of your FTP is basically almost 100% glycogen you're burning through. And your goal for Ironman is to preserve glycogen, but you're basically going into glycogen right away. It's just a downward spiral. So people who overbike, they're just so obsessed about the bike. Okay, they can't even think about the run. Past performances. So maybe this person's thinking, well, I used to ride 540 at Wisconsin. I used to ride 530. Well, what do you mean I'm going to ride 548? Well, you're not the same athlete, unfortunately. You're not going to ride it. The numbers are not in your favor. Well, I'm going to prove you wrong. So chasing old numbers, how'd that work out? Not super good. And just short-term thinking. It's like, this feels good right here. I should just ride this. Well, I still have 5 hours left. No, just think long-term. Like, what are you doing right now that's going to affect you later? Because, if you're looking to be competitive, like let's just say if you're a competitive athlete, the difference between riding 530 compared to 520 could be an hour on the run because you're walking, because you overshot it. Execute your race that's realistic. And understand that you have 26 miles to go once you get off that bike. This is a good one too. This is a half Ironman. So you can see the heart rate, you can see the power. So somebody asked the question, can you explain free pedaling or soft pedaling? This is a great graph to show soft pedaling at its finest and for somebody who is really suffering in a race. All those little dropouts is soft pedaling. So when I see this file and I see the way the heart rate moves, I'm thinking this person was suffering. This person did not ride very well. All the soft pedaling, it's like they were soft pedaling every chance they could for a variety of reasons. Look at the heart rate. Super high in the beginning, moves down as you go. Not the way you want it to go. Some reasons. Heart rate's very high in the beginning. That's the example of a poor swim. So if you're somebody who doesn't swim if you're somebody who doesn't like to swim, if you're somebody who doesn't put in big sets in the pool, you're going to suffer the beginning part of the bike. And you either may recover from that or you may not recover from that. The heart rate in the first hour was almost 10%. Okay. Not good. Remember, you want to be in 0 to 5%. 8 to 9% is basically the difference between your normalized power and your heart rate. It's a huge difference. Let's look at the power. The first hour, 72%. That's somebody saying, okay, let's say my goal percentage was 75%. I need to ride my wattage. But my heart rate's so high, I'm not paying attention to that, but I need to ride it. The second hour, 62%. That's 10% difference from 1 hour to the next. Third hour, just 61%, right? If you're riding 61%, you know that you're not in a good place. Why does this happen? Poor swimming, a poor swim, poor execution, poor swim fitness, also over tapering. When we look back on this, the freshness factor of this athlete going into this race was 35. It's really high. And again, I wrote in there, poor swim fitness, poor race execution. Did you start too fast? Did you not put in many 2,000-yard sets? Did you just do a bunch of whatever? So let's get into your performance management chart. So I'm going to spend some time on this, and this is key. So here is just an example of somebody's performance management chart. You can find this in Training Peaks, super key. Now, here's the one thing. For all of this to make sense, you need to have all of your thresholds in Training Peaks accurate. Swim threshold, bike threshold, run threshold. So if your run threshold is set at 8-minute pace, or whatever the default is, but you're running 6-minute pace, your TSS is going to be through the roof, which may look good, but it's going to give you a false sense of your fitness. And so you need to have accurate numbers in Training Peaks for this to work. So if that freaks you like, well, I don't know. You can literally go into Training Peaks, set your thresholds, go into this graph and say, reset my figures, and it'll give you an accurate picture of what this looks like. And so there's many ways of looking at a PMC graph. And the one thing that I look at is, so say if you're competitive, I'm just going to start there. A lot of times I give people a CTL number. And CTL, chronic training load, is a very, very good indication of how fit you're going to be on race day. So if you're looking to go really fast, but your CTL is 80 on race day, you're just not going to be that conditioned. You haven't done the training, or you're too new, or you're just a really new athlete. So one thing is saying, okay, I want to get your CTL to 140 or 130 or 120 by race day. We can also look at it in regards to, are your training sessions effective? Because you can see, like, the pink is the CTL, okay? Your pink is your CTL. No, I'm sorry, your pink is the acute training of that. Either way, you can see the blue mountain in the background, okay? That is basically the underlying fitness of the athlete from January 1 to basically race day, okay? You can see how it goes up in little mountaintops, okay? The pinkish are basically like the acute hits of training. That's like your everyday training. So if you go and you're training, 1 hour here, 1 hour there, and all of a sudden you do a 6-hour day, you can see how some of the pink stuff just spikes really hard. And those are big sessions. So a lot of times you can look at training, and if your blue graph at the bottom is not moving, then chances are your training isn't hard enough. Like, you're not putting workouts in there that are challenging enough that's going to elicit a good response, which means you're not getting fitter, which means you're just training to exercise. And if that's cool, like if that's your thing, but most people are in the sport to see improvement. And so your graph should look like this. At some level, it should be going up, right? You should see big pink dots and you should see declines, okay? So you need to set up accurate thresholds. If you don't have that, it's not accurate, okay? Effective sessions, too big or too small, sustainable training. because you can see when this athlete had some declines because the blue went down. The yellow goes up, the freshness factor. Yellow's freshness. Micro breaks, tapering. Are you over tapering? Are you under tapering into training? And so these are big things. So here we go. Beginning of the season. Not really, but January 1, whatever. Right there. Beginning of the season. Ironman. Okay? Beginning point, end point. That's the difference of what we're looking at. Okay? First thing, big hit. You can see it. Spring training camp. Commonly, every spring, we do a training camp. This one fell here. And you can see training well, and then we hit it really hard. Okay? Like 4 to 5 days, a lot of volume. And you can see pink went up, and then after that followed, you can see the fitness went up. And then what happened after that? We rested. Okay? So commonly we go through big periods and then a rest period. Big periods and a rest period. You can see twice there where his freshness factor went up big time. Those are breaks. It's okay to take breaks because look at where he ended, right? So if you think you're going to train incredibly hard from January 1 to basically Ironman, you're not going to. You need to structure some recovery time. And you can obviously see in this person's chart that it works out fine. Like for every athlete that I have, I give them breaks. Okay. If you don't take breaks, then you're just going to get burned out. Like it's inevitable. Like nobody can train that level of focus for 9 months, 10 months. You just can't do it. You just can't. So you can see the first rest period, the yellow goes up, rest period, the pink goes down. He's fresh. He's, whatever. And then guess what? We come back super hard. First really big Ironman build. Okay. So a lot of times in Ironman preparations, I do many builds where I call one like an introduction build to volume, where it's just volume, right? This is like the volume we're going to start to do. Not a lot of intensity, just a lot of volume. It's the introduction to it, and then he raced. Mid-season break, gets hot where he's at. I think he's traveling at this time too. Guy travels quite a bit. Mid-season break. Now, gun-ho. Final build starts to go. Another big camp. This person came to Madison. 3 to 4 days in Madison. Put a lot of good training in. Some big days. I remember this day actually specifically. We did the Ironman course with another athlete, and it was incredibly hard. The whole day was tough. So you can see, does the camp, comes back, the pink goes down, recovers from it all. Because anytime you do training camps or big days or big weekends, like you need rest. Okay, you just need rest. And then the final build, I call it the final bike build, because commonly in the final 6 weeks or 8 weeks, you want to focus mainly on the bike because that's the least stressful between biking and running. So a lot of times you want to like get your running volume higher earlier and then hold it. And you hold the run volume because it creates the most stress. And then the biking volume, you keep going with it because you can. And then 10-day taper and then Ironman. So this is, I didn't just give you the best graph. This is a very common graph. And you can see that it commonly has big ups, downs. It's not a continual up. People get injured. You're going to get injured. People it's like you train this much and you're going to experience overuse injuries. Okay, so just you're going to see lulls. It's okay. Totally okay. More people show up over-tapered, flat, with a high heart rate than fit. Don't chase the 1 to 2% big taper. Your training weekends, if done right, should tell you a lot. That went awesome. It's because you're constantly aerobically fit. And if you need 2 to 3 weeks to shed a lot of fatigue, you're just training too hard, or you're mentally not quite there for this race. And so I saw this quote come from a coach, a great quote, where, if you think that, the 1 to 2%, that taper is going to be the big thing, it's not. And too frequently I see people get to 3 weeks out because they've read it in the training Bible or something. And like, well, 3 weeks out, taper time. Those people get to race day, they get to race week, and it's like they're just like slugs. Like their muscles feel terrible. Like you don't need a 3-week taper. 2 weeks acceptable, but it's how you taper it. And a lot of it is, if you're tapering for 3 weeks, your blood volume decreases a lot. And that's what happens when you get sick and you stop training. You come back and you're like, oh, my heart rate's super high. It's because your blood volume just dropped, which means if you used to run 8-minute pace at 140 beats per minute, and all of a sudden your blood volume's low, and you go run 8-minute pace and it's 160, it's because your heart has to pump so much faster to fuel that same exercise. And when you drop volume too much, your body's like, well, I don't need all this blood. So it reduces. And then you're like, oh, well, I need to do this Ironman, and that needs a lot of blood. That needs a lot of oxygen. And like, your body's like, well, you just said 2 weeks ago that you don't need this. That's why you don't want to taper too much. And a lot of times, to be honest, you see things where it's saying, well, do you taper intensity or volume into an Ironman? And there's many schools of thought. But truthfully, I've seen a lot of good success with tapering intensity and actually keeping volume somewhat high going into Ironman. And it's just one of those things where you're thinking, it's an endurance event. It's not an Olympic distance race. It's not a sprint distance race. In an Ironman, you need volume. You need blood volume, right? So don't taper volume as much as you think. And I'm not saying don't go into the race week not having taper at all, because that won't end very well. But you don't need to taper as much as you think. Flash next. It's important. Last thing. I think this is the last part. Great performances don't happen by screwing around. So a lot of dots there. So great performances don't happen by screwing around. If you don't have a plan, you're not going to get to where you want to. If you wake up and you're like, what do I want to do today? If you wake up and you're like, yeah, this is on my training plan, but I really don't want to do that, then you're kind of just screwing around. And especially if you have big goals, but you don't follow a plan, if you have big goals, but you just, or if you have big goals and you don't have a coach, or if you don't have structure, then you're really not going to accomplish much. And just have a plan, stick with it. Like, you can see that this person achieved great things, and it's because they followed the plan and they stuck with it, and they stuck with the recovery. It's like they didn't get to the recovery week and think, nah, screw it, I'm just going to keep training hard. Like, yeah, I'm going to recover. That's what my coach said to do. And then guess what? They recovered, they got fitter. But commonly, the people who don't recover and they blow through recovery, so like, this is stupid, I'm invincible, they're the ones in 2 months that are like, I don't want to train. I'm tired. I hate this sport. The sport's stupid. It's like, no, because you're not getting the rest, or you're overtraining, or you're training without a purpose. And that training without a purpose is actually creating a lot of insecurity because you know you're not doing it right. So went a little tangent there, but I look at this and I think that, again, if you want to accomplish anything, if it's an Ironman finish, if it's a Kona qualification, if it's a personal best, you just need to execute the plan, right? Execute the plan, build, be effective, all that kind of stuff. So that's all I have. Mark this down. April 14th, the next webinar is going to be called Fixing the Swim. And I'm pumped to get a lot of video from some swimmers about a lot of the errors that I see people making. So I'm going to provide you video. I'm going to provide you ways to fix it. I'm super excited to be doing this next webinar, just because I loved coaching swimming. I love fixing swim strokes. Like, we just had a beginner swim class earlier today, which is why this one goes so late. But April 14th, and obviously I'll send out a lot of information. But if you want to be a part of it, definitely join. It's going to be awesome. So I'm going to leave this open to questions. This is where, if you want to unmute yourself and ask the question, if you want to type a question, go for it. So it is 9:12. And so I'll give it a couple minutes. And if nobody asks the questions, I'll shut this down. But you have questions, please ask them. Where do I see this Training Peaks app? It's in your dashboard. So maybe in your dashboard it's not set up, but if you go into if you go to your TrainingPeaks account and you go to dashboard, it should show like dashboard, and you can basically you can find a graph and throw it in there, and your performance manager chart should be on there. So any questions? Nobody? Come on, there's got to be a question. That's it. Well, thank you all for coming on. I know it's getting late, and you have my email. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. But again, can't thank you enough for coming on. And yeah, that's all I got. So talk to y'all later.